Right around the year 1900, something huge happened. The United States completely changed its game plan for how it deals with the rest of the world. Today, we're going to dive into that incredible shift from a country that mostly kept to itself to a major global power, and, how that pretty much changed everything.
So, how on earth did that happen, right? How did the US go from a nation that went out of its way to avoid drama to being a key player in, well, almost every big international event?
For most of its early days, you can really think of the US as the new kid at school. Happy to trade with everyone, for sure, but absolutely determined to stay out of the cafeteria food fights. The main goal was super simple. Let's just focus on our own stuff and not get dragged into Europe's messy and never-ending arguments. Which brings us to our first section here. We're calling it America's Keep Out sign. Because this whole policy of just minding its own business, it actually had a name. And that name was isolationism. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It's the idea of staying out of other countries' political business. The focus was all internal, on building up the nation from the inside out. And listen, this wasn't just some passive thing. It was a core belief, the main strategy. You can trace it all the way back to leaders like George Washington, who famously warned the new country to avoid foreign entanglements. And the thinking behind it was crystal clear. Stay safe, stay neutral, and whatever you do, don't get pulled into other people's wars. So the early U.S. game plan was all about minding its own business. That meant tackling its own problems and growing across North America. For instance, back in the 1800s, when people in Hungary and Poland were fighting for independence, a lot of Americans sympathized, of course, but the government's official position was, nope, not our fight. They stuck to that principle like glue. But, things change. As the 19th century started winding down, that long-held policy began to show some serious cracks. There was a huge turning point just over the horizon, one that was about to completely shake up America's place in the world. Think about it like this. A small tree, after decades of just growing, eventually gets really tall and strong. Its branches just naturally start reaching out, right? That's kind of what happened with the US. It had become an economic and military powerhouse. And with that new strength, well, that brought a whole new level of confidence and a totally new way of looking at its role in the world. And once things started changing, they changed fast. It all kicks off in 1898 with the Spanish-American War. Then, bam, the U.S. jumps into World War I. And finally, it's a driving force in creating the United Nations after World War II. That old keep out sign was officially coming down. If you had to pick just one year that changed absolutely everything, it would have to be 1898. The Spanish-American War was the real deal, the big turning point. By helping Cuba get its independence, the U.S. not only flexed its growing military muscle, but it also ended up with new territories like Puerto Rico and Guam. This was it. This was the country's first major step into global politics. So that leads us to our next question. What did it actually look like for the U.S. to step onto the world stage? Because it wasn't just about fighting wars, it was a whole new philosophy, a new way of thinking about foreign policy. This big shift really involved two competing ideas. For the longest time, realism was the name of the game, the idea that countries should only act in their own self-interest. Look out for number one. But this new philosophy, idealism, started gaining ground. It argued that the U.S. should actually use its power to promote things like democracy and human rights around the world. In the end, U.S. policy became a mix of both, but idealism was suddenly a powerful new ingredient in the recipe. The change was just night and day. Before 1900, the policy was isolationism. After, interventionism. Before, the military was focused on North America. After, it was fighting wars overseas. Before, the U.S. avoided alliances at all costs. After, it was forming huge ones like NATO. The transformation couldn't be more obvious. Okay, so why are we talking about a change that happened more than 100 years ago? Simple, because the impact is still a huge deal today. This shift literally set the stage for the modern world as we know it. Starting with that Spanish-American War, a whole series of massive events locked in this new global role. Fighting in 2 world wars, helping create the United Nations to try and get countries to work together, and then leading one side of the Cold War for decades. Every single one of those things was a direct result of that pivot at the turn of the century. And that's really the key takeaway here. The decision to step onto the world stage all those years ago is the direct reason why the U.S. is involved in peacekeeping missions, global organizations, and tackling huge worldwide challenges like climate change today. That history isn't over. We are still living inside its legacy.
And all of this leaves us with a final, really big thought. That shift from isolationism to interventionism defined America's role for the entire 20th century. So the big question now is, in the kind of world we're living in today, what's going to define its role for the next 100 years?